In the quiet suburbs of Los Angeles, where the morning sun cast long shadows across manicured lawns, two black SUVs pulled up to a modest two-story home. The vehicle doors opened simultaneously, revealing four men in dark suits and sunglasses. They moved with practiced precision, a choreography of authority that had intimidated countless suspects over the years. Little did they know that behind the door of this unassuming house stood the daughter of one of Hollywood's most formidable actors, and she was about to give them a masterclass in constitutional rights that would leave them speechless. Drop a comment where you're watching from today. The lead agent, a stern-faced man with a military haircut, approached the door with confidence born from years of federal service. Special Agent Richard Tanner had tracked international terrorists, drug kingpins, and cybercriminals across 3 continents. Today's assignment seemed straightforward. Locate a phone allegedly linked to a series of encrypted messages that posed a potential national security threat. The phone's last ping had led them here, to the home of Elizabeth Hackman, daughter of legendary actor Gene Hackman. The morning had started like any other for Elizabeth. At 42, she had built a respectable career as a cybersecurity consultant, far from the Hollywood spotlight that had followed her father. Her home office was filled with technical manuals, computer equipment, and framed family photos, including one of her and her father at the Academy Awards decades earlier. Elizabeth had inherited her father's intense gaze and unwavering principle, characteristics that had served her well in her profession. The sharp knock at her door interrupted her morning coffee. Through the peephole, she observed the 4 men standing on her porch, their government-issue SUVs visible in the driveway. Elizabeth had encountered federal agents before in her professional capacity, and something about their demeanor, too confident, too presumptuous, triggered her instincts. She opened the door partially, security chains still in place. The agents exchanged glances, momentarily thrown by her measured response. Most civilians became immediately flustered when confronted by federal badges. Agent Tanner held his identification closer to the gap in the door, allowing her to examine it thoroughly. "Thank you," Elizabeth said after carefully reviewing his credentials. "What exactly is this regarding, Agent Tanner?" "Ma'am, we have reason to believe you're in possession of a device connected to a sensitive investigation. We have a warrant to search these premises and locate the device in question." He produced an official-looking document from his jacket. Elizabeth didn't reach for it. Instead, she asked, "Is this warrant specifically for my residence? And does it explicitly mention what you're looking for?" Agent Morales, younger and less experienced, shifted uncomfortably. Agent Tanner's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "The warrant covers this address and any electronic devices found within. Your cooperation would be appreciated, Ms. Hackman." "I understand," Elizabeth replied evenly. "However, I'd like to review the warrant before allowing entry, as is my right. Also, I'd like to call my attorney to be present during any search." The atmosphere changed subtly. What should have been a routine execution of a search warrant was meeting unexpected resistance, not belligerent or emotional, but procedural and knowledgeable. "Ms. Hackman, delaying federal agents in the execution of their duties could be construed as obstruction," Agent Wilson interjected, his voice carrying a hint of warning. Elizabeth's expression remained unchanged. "I'm not obstructing anything, Agent Wilson. I'm exercising my constitutional rights. The Fourth Amendment protects against unreasonable searches and seizures, and the Supreme Court has consistently upheld a citizen's right to review a warrant before allowing entry. I'm simply following established legal protocol." The morning sun climbed higher, illuminating the standoff on the porch. Neighbors had begun to notice the government vehicles and the suited agents. A jogger slowed his pace as he passed the house, curiosity evident on his face. Agent Tanner's professional mask slipped slightly, revealing annoyance beneath. "Ms. Hackman, we have reason to believe that a phone registered to this address was used to access restricted databases. This is a matter of national security, not a constitutional debate." Elizabeth nodded thoughtfully. "I understand the seriousness of your investigation, Agent Tanner. However, the Constitution doesn't include exceptions for impatience or convenience. If you have a properly executed warrant, I'll happily comply after reviewing it with my attorney present. If not, then this conversation needs to continue with proper legal representation." The neighborhood had grown quieter, as if holding its breath. Behind Elizabeth, on a bookshelf visible through the partially open door, sat framed family photographs, including one of her and Gene Hackman at his retirement party. In it, father and daughter shared the same determined expression, a genetic inheritance of principle and fortitude. Agent Chen, who had remained silent until now, studied Elizabeth with newfound interest. "Ms. Hackman, are you an attorney?" he asked. "No," Elizabeth replied. "I'm a cybersecurity consultant specializing in digital privacy and data protection, which is precisely why I understand both the technical and legal aspects of what you're investigating." The revelation landed heavily among the agents. They weren't dealing with an average civilian intimidated by federal badges. Elizabeth Hackman had spent her career navigating the complex intersection of technology and law, exactly the expertise relevant to their current investigation. Agent Tanner reassessed his approach. "Ms. Hackman, here's the warrant." He held the document toward the door gap. "You'll see it's properly executed by Judge Hernandez of the Federal District Court. We're looking specifically for a device that accessed government databases using credentials that were reported stolen last month." Elizabeth took the document and began reading it carefully, her eyes scanning each paragraph with professional scrutiny. The agents waited in uncomfortable silence, their authority momentarily suspended by due process. "This warrant," Elizabeth finally said, "authorizes you to search for and seize a specific iPhone with the serial number listed here. Is that correct?" "Yes," Agent Tanner confirmed, a note of relief in his voice at her apparent cooperation. "Agent Tanner," Elizabeth continued, "this warrant is for an address on Laurel Avenue. I live on Laurel Drive. You're at the wrong house." "Furthermore," Elizabeth continued, "even if this were the correct address, the warrant specifies an iPhone with this serial number. I use an Android device, as do all members of my household." Agent Tanner's face had turned to stone. Years of impeccable service, and now a fundamental error, threatened both their investigation and potentially his career. The warrant had been issued correctly, but executed at the wrong location, a mistake that any first-year law student would recognize as invalidating any evidence they might have found. "I apologize for the inconvenience, Ms. Hackman," Agent Tanner finally said, his voice tight with professional embarrassment. "There appears to have been a clerical error." Elizabeth nodded, maintaining her composure. "I understand. These things happen. However, I would suggest that in future investigations, you verify addresses more carefully before approaching citizens at their homes. Had I been less informed about my rights, this error might have resulted in an illegal search." As the agents retreated toward their vehicles, Elizabeth called after them. "Agent Tanner? The address you're looking for is likely 2 blocks south. The street names cause confusion for many delivery drivers as well." What the agents couldn't know as they drove away was that Elizabeth's calm demeanor masked a racing heart and trembling hands. Standing up to federal authority wasn't easy, even when you were right. As she closed her door and leaned against it, she glanced at the photo of her father, the man who had played both heroes and villains, but had always taught her that knowing your rights was the first defense against those who would abuse power. Elizabeth reached for her phone, her decidedly non-iPhone phone, and dialed a familiar number. "Dad, you won't believe what just happened on my doorstep." The sleek interior of the FBI field office buzzed with activity as Agent Tanner and his team returned from their failed encounter at Elizabeth Hackman's home. Digital displays illuminated the space with maps, data streams, and surveillance feeds, the nervous system of modern federal investigation. The embarrassment of their morning error hung over them like a storm cloud as they gathered in the glass-walled conference room nicknamed the Fishbowl. "How did we miss this?" Agent Tanner demanded, spreading the warrant papers across the polished table. "Laurel Avenue versus Laurel Drive? That's basic geography, people." Agent Morales, still new enough to the bureau that his ID card lanyard looked unworn, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "The database pulled the wrong address when we input the phone's last known ping. The GPS coordinates were correct, but the street name translated incorrectly." "That's not good enough," Tanner replied, his voice tightly controlled. "We just embarrassed ourselves in front of a civilian who knows exactly how badly we screwed up." He didn't add what everyone was thinking, that Elizabeth Hackman wasn't just any civilian. She was the daughter of Gene Hackman, an actor who had portrayed tough, principled characters in films spanning decades. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Agent Chen, the team's technology specialist, tapped rapidly on his tablet. "There's something else we should consider," he said, his eyes still fixed on the screen. "I've been digging into Elizabeth Hackman's background. She's not just a cybersecurity consultant. She specializes in digital privacy protection and has worked with several civil liberties organizations on cases involving government surveillance overreach." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. They hadn't just approached the wrong house, they had approached the worst possible wrong house, the home of someone professionally equipped to challenge their methods. "Perfect," Agent Wilson muttered sarcastically. "So we potentially tipped our hand to someone who literally makes her living, spotting exactly what we're doing." Agent Tanner paced the length of the conference room, his reflection multiplying across the glass walls. "What do we know about the actual target? Have we confirmed the address on Laurel Avenue is correct?" Chen nodded, bringing up a satellite view on the main display. "Correct address confirmed. The residence belongs to a Marcus Delgado, 28, works in IT at Crestview Medical Center. No criminal record, but his internet footprint shows participation in several hacker forums under various aliases. The digital signature of the breach that accessed the FBI personnel database matches techniques he's discussed online." "And we're sure the phone we're tracking is his?" Tanner asked. "The IMEI number matches a device purchased by Delgado 6 months ago," Chen confirmed. "Its last ping came from the vicinity of both Laurel addresses, which explains the confusion. But here's where it gets interesting. The phone hasn't moved from that general area in 48 hours, which is unusual for an active device." Morales frowned. "Could he have ditched it, or is he just staying home?" "Possibly," Chen replied. "Or he could be using a signal masker to create a false location while the actual device is elsewhere." Tanner stopped pacing, his mind working through the implications. "Either way, we need to move quickly. If Elizabeth Hackman decides to make noise about our visit this morning, it could alert our actual target. Let's get a surveillance team on the Laurel Avenue address immediately, but keep a discreet distance. No marked vehicles, nothing obvious." As the agents dispersed to execute the revised plan, Agent Tanner remained in the conference room, staring at the digital map with its pulsing dot representing their target phone. Something about the morning's encounter with Elizabeth Hackman continued to nag at him. Her response had been too measured, too informed, not the reaction of someone surprised by federal agents on her doorstep. Back on Laurel Drive, Elizabeth Hackman sat in her home office, 3 computer monitors glowing before her. After the FBI's departure, she had immediately activated security protocols that were far from standard for the average homeowner. Her father's fame had taught her the value of privacy early in life, and her professional expertise had given her the tools to protect it. On one screen, she reviewed public records databases, quickly identifying Agent Tanner and his team through facial recognition software, comparing their images to publicly available FBI press conferences and social media. On another monitor, she monitored her home's perimeter through discreetly placed cameras, watching for any sign that the agents might return. The third screen displayed a complex matrix of data: signal strengths, device identifiers, and geographic coordinates. "Interesting," she murmured to herself, fingers flying across her keyboard. "They're looking for a phone that's been stationary for 2 days, but they think it's moving between addresses." Elizabeth knew he was right. Federal agents embarrassed by a civilian were unpredictable. They might back off, acknowledging their error, or they might double down, finding another justification to return to her door. Her doorbell camera activated, showing not federal agents, but a delivery person holding a package. Elizabeth checked the tracking number against her expected deliveries before approving the drop-off remotely. In her line of work, caution wasn't paranoia. It was standard procedure. As the delivery van pulled away, Elizabeth noticed another vehicle slowly driving past her house, a nondescript sedan with 2 occupants. Nothing definitive marked it as surveillance, but years of security work had honed her instincts. She captured the license plate with her system and ran it through databases, discovering it was registered to a rental company frequently used by government agencies. "So they're not giving up," she said to the empty room, "just changing tactics." Elizabeth opened an encrypted messaging application and sent a brief text to a contact listed only as Patriot, a former NSA whistleblower who now worked with privacy advocates. Federal interest in our neighborhood, possible database connection, stay alert. The response came seconds later. Expected, not coincidental. Check your email secure server. Elizabeth switched to her encrypted email account, finding a message with a single attachment, a redacted FBI memo dated 3 days earlier. The document detailed an investigation into unauthorized access of the Bureau's personnel database, with particular concern about exposed undercover identities. The breach had been traced to an IP address in her neighborhood. The pieces began falling into place. The FBI wasn't randomly phishing. They were responding to a legitimate security threat. But their execution was flawed, potentially compromising their own investigation through procedural errors. Her father's voice seemed to echo in her mind. Sometimes the right thing isn't the easy thing, Lizzie. Elizabeth reached for her phone, hesitated, then put it down again. Before making any decisions, she needed more information, and in her world, information was power. She turned back to her keyboards, diving deeper into the digital trail that had somehow entangled her quiet home in an FBI manhunt. Outside, the unmarked sedan circled the block again, its occupants unaware that they were being watched as carefully as they were watching. The game of digital cat and mouse was just beginning, and Elizabeth Hackman had been playing it long before these agents even knew the rules. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the suburban landscape as Elizabeth Hackman made her way down Laurel Avenue, 2 blocks from her own home on Laurel Drive. She walked with casual confidence, dressed in workout clothes with wireless earbuds in place, the perfect cover for a reconnaissance mission disguised as an afternoon jog. The weight of her father's warning still echoed in her mind, but she had always believed that information was the best defense against uncertainty. The address the FBI had actually intended to visit belonged to a modest ranch-style home with weathered blue shutters and an unkempt lawn. Elizabeth slowed her pace as she approached, taking careful note of the property without appearing to stare. The house had a neglected quality. Newspapers piled on the porch, blinds drawn tight against the afternoon sun. A battered compact car sat in the driveway, covered in a fine layer of dust that suggested it hadn't moved in days. Elizabeth's earbuds weren't playing music. Instead, they were connected to a modified smartphone in her pocket, running specialized software that scanned for electronic signals. As she passed the house, her device detected multiple wireless networks, standard for any residence, but also something more unusual, a signal splitter that was broadcasting duplicate MAC addresses, a technique often used to confuse tracking efforts. Elizabeth completed her circuit through the neighborhood, gathering more digital reconnaissance before returning to her own home. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to form a clearer picture, but significant gaps remained. Why would the FBI initially confuse her address with the target's? Simple clerical error seemed too convenient an explanation. Back in her home office, Elizabeth pulled up property records for both addresses. The Laurel Avenue house was owned by a shell company that, after several layers of digital excavation, connected back to a holding corporation with government contracts. The tenant, Marcus Delgado, had only lived there for 8 months, having relocated from Seattle where he'd worked for a different medical facility. "This doesn't add up," Elizabeth said aloud, staring at her monitors. Either Marcus Delgado was a sophisticated hacker who had penetrated FBI databases, or something else entirely was happening, something that had mistakenly drawn federal attention to her own doorstep. The stakes had just risen dramatically. If undercover identities had been compromised, resulting in operational failures and possibly deaths, this wasn't just about data theft anymore. It was about national security and human lives. Elizabeth's moral compass, inherited from her principled father, pulled her in conflicting directions. Her professional instincts and personal experience made her wary of government overreach, but she couldn't ignore the implications of compromised undercover operations. Her contemplation was interrupted by an alert from her security system. Another vehicle had parked across from her house, not the sedan from earlier, but a delivery van with faded lettering for a local florist. The driver remained inside, making no move to deliver anything. Elizabeth's security cameras zoomed in, capturing images that her system quickly analyzed and matched to Agent Morales, the youngest member of the FBI team from that morning. "Amateurs," she muttered, though her tone carried more concern than derision. If the FBI was splitting their surveillance between her home and the Laurel Avenue address, They either suspected her involvement or were covering their bases due to the morning's confusion. Either way, it indicated their investigation was proceeding without the clarity needed for success. Elizabeth made a decision. She reached for her secure phone and dialed a number saved under the name Murphy, her father's longtime friend and former technical consultant on several of his films portraying law enforcement. The man who answered had the gruff voice of someone who had spent decades in actual police work before transitioning to Hollywood. As she ended the call, Elizabeth's home phone rang, her public, non-secured line. The caller ID showed unknown number. She let it ring twice more before answering with a neutral, "Hello?" "Ms. Hackman, this is Special Agent Tanner." The FBI agent's voice carried the forced pleasantness of someone trying to repair a damaged professional relationship. "I'm calling to formally apologize for our error this morning. After reviewing our information, we confirmed that we did indeed approach the wrong address." "Ms. Hackman?" he prompted after several seconds. "I'm listening, Agent Tanner," she finally replied, "though I'm curious why you have this number, as I don't recall providing it to you or your team." The momentary hesitation before his response told Elizabeth everything she needed to know. They had accessed her personal information after leaving her property, a fishing expedition without proper authorization. "We have access to various databases for contact information," Tanner said, his explanation technically true, but deliberately vague. "I wanted to personally assure you that we've resolved the confusion and you won't be further inconvenienced." "I appreciate the courtesy call," Elizabeth replied, her tone neutral, "though I'm sure you understand that, as a privacy professional, I'm sensitive to how my contact information is accessed by government agencies." Another pause, slightly longer this time. "Of course, again, we apologize for the confusion." The silence that followed her question stretched for several uncomfortable seconds. When Tanner spoke again, his voice had lost its forced cordiality. "Ms. Hackman, this is an ongoing federal investigation. I cannot discuss operational details with civilians." "I understand completely," Elizabeth replied, allowing warmth to enter her voice for the first time. "I just thought, given your team's attention to both my home and the property on Laurel Avenue today, you might appreciate some professional courtesy in return." She could almost hear Agent Tanner's sharp intake of breath through the phone. He hadn't expected her to know about their continued surveillance. "Have a good afternoon, Agent Tanner," Elizabeth concluded politely before ending the call. She set down the phone and turned back to her monitors, a new determination in her expression. The FBI agents had made their first move, then their second. Now it was her turn, and Elizabeth Hackman had no intention of being merely a bystander in whatever game was unfolding in her quiet neighborhood. Night had fallen over the suburban landscape, transforming the quiet neighborhood into a canvas of shadows and muted lamplight. Inside the FBI surveillance van now parked 3 blocks from both Laurel addresses, Agent Tanner stared at the digital displays with growing frustration. The phone call from Elizabeth Hackman had rattled him more than he cared to admit to his team. Not only had she spotted their surveillance, but she had somehow known about their corrected target as well. "She's playing with us," he muttered, reviewing the transcript of their conversation. "She wanted me to know that she knows." Agent Chen looked up from his workstation, his face illuminated by the blue glow of multiple screens. "Sir, I've completed the background sweep on Elizabeth Hackman. Her credentials are impressive. MIT graduate, cybersecurity consultation for major corporations, guest lecturer at 3 universities on digital privacy law. She's published papers on counter-surveillance techniques and government overreach in the digital age." "That explains her reaction this morning," Agent Morales added. "She wasn't just exercising her rights, she was practically reciting her own curriculum." Tanner rubbed his temples, feeling the beginnings of a tension headache. "What's her connection to our target? There must be one, or this is too much of a coincidence." "Nothing obvious in their digital footprints," Chen replied. "No social media connections, no shared employment history, no financial transactions between them. But there is something interesting about both properties." He pulled up a map on the main display. "Both homes are serviced by the same internet provider, using the same neighborhood node for their fiber optic connection." "That's hardly unusual," Agent Wilson interjected. "Half the neighborhood probably uses the same service." "True," Chen acknowledged. "But 3 months ago, there was a service interruption that affected only these 2 addresses. The provider's maintenance records show they dispatched a technician who reported finding evidence of tampering with the junction box that serves both homes. Tanner leaned forward, his interest piqued. Tampering? What kind? The report isn't specific, just notes that an unauthorized splitter was removed and the connection restored. The company flagged it for security follow-up, but there's no record of any further investigation. So someone could have been intercepting data from both houses, Tanner mused, or creating a connection between them that wouldn't show up in conventional records. The implications hung in the air like smoke. If Elizabeth Hackman's internet connection had been compromised alongside their targets, it might explain why their initial tracking led them to her address. But it raised an even more troubling question. Was she a victim in this scenario or a participant? Sir, Agent Morales called from his monitoring station. Activity at the Delgado residence. Lights just came on in what appears to be the back room. All attention shifted to the thermal imaging feed showing the Laurel Avenue house. After nearly 12 hours of complete inactivity, the sudden sign of life electrified the team. Do we move in? Wilson asked, already reaching for his tactical gear. Tanner hesitated, his instincts warring with protocol. Not yet. The warrant is for a specific device, not the person. We need confirmation the phone is active and inside. Chen's fingers flew across his keyboard, initiating a targeted scan for the device's unique identifier. Sir, I'm getting something, but it's strange. His brow furrowed in concentration. The signal's there, but it's fragmenting, like it's being bounced through multiple points. Could he be using a signal masker? Morales suggested. Possibly, but this pattern is unusually sophisticated. Chen's expression grew more troubled as he analyzed the data. It's almost as if improper warrant execution detected, surveillance compromised. What the hell? Tanner exclaimed. Chen, what's happening? The tech specialist's fingers raced across his keyboard, trying to regain control of their systems. Someone's hacked our secure connection. They've identified our digital signature and... He stopped abruptly, staring at his screen in disbelief. They've redirected our surveillance feeds. We're not seeing the target house anymore. This is a loop of old data. How long? Tanner demanded, based on the timestamp discrepancies, possibly since we set up. Hours. The implications hit the team like a physical blow. Their careful surveillance had been compromised from the beginning. Whatever was happening at the target location, they were now blind to it. Get it back online, Tanner ordered, his voice tight with controlled anger. Now. While the FBI team scrambled to recover their surveillance capability, Elizabeth Hackman sat in her home office, watching their panic unfold through their own compromised systems. The message she had sent was perhaps unnecessarily dramatic, but sometimes federal agents needed a clear demonstration of their vulnerabilities before they would consider alternative approaches. Her screens displayed not only the interior of the FBI surveillance van, but also the true current state of the house on Laurel Avenue, where Marcus Delgado had just returned after being conspicuously absent for the past 2 days. Elizabeth zoomed in on the thermal imaging of the target house, watching as Delgado moved purposefully through the rooms, gathering items and placing them in what appeared to be a duffel bag. He's preparing to run, she murmured to herself. Elizabeth's phone buzzed with an incoming message from her contact, Patriot. Bangkok situation worse than reported. 2 more agents compromised in Tehran. White House briefed. Total information, blackout imminent. The pieces of the puzzle were aligning in a troubling pattern. Whatever data breach had occurred, it was escalating from a security concern to an international crisis. And somehow, through either coincidence or design, her quiet suburban street had become ground zero. She encrypted the message with a unique key before sending it not to her whistleblower contact, but to a private server she knew was monitored by individuals who operated in the shadowlands between official government channels and deniable operations, contacts she had developed during her years consulting on digital security for clients she never publicly acknowledged. The response came less than 30 seconds later. Authentication required. Elizabeth didn't hesitate. She opened her secure safe and removed a physical authentication token, a small device rarely used in this age of digital verification. After generating the required code, she transmitted it through a separate channel and waited. 2 minutes passed before her secure phone rang. Not a text this time, but an actual call. She answered without speaking. "Mockingbird authenticated," said the voice on the other end. Female, precise, professional. Situation assessment requested. FBI surveillance operation compromised in pursuit of data breach suspect. Elizabeth reported succinctly. Target appears flight ready. Breach has international implications with confirmed casualties. Local operation is disorganized and procedurally compromised. "Your involvement status?" the voice inquired. A brief pause followed. When the voice returned, it carried a note of authority that hadn't been present before. "Stand down on direct intervention. Maintain surveillance and information advantage. Asset deployment authorized for containment. Authentication Sierra 9 Delta 4. The call ended as abruptly as it had begun. Elizabeth set down her phone, a weight settling across her shoulders. She had just escalated the situation beyond the FBI's jurisdiction, calling in resources that officially didn't exist. It was a step she had taken only twice before in her career, both times involving threats that transcended ordinary law enforcement capabilities. On her monitor, Marcus Delgado continued packing, unaware that his window for escape was rapidly closing. In the FBI surveillance van, Agent Tanner and his team struggled to regain control of their compromised systems, equally unaware that the situation had just moved beyond their authority. Elizabeth Hackman, daughter of the man who had portrayed some of cinema's most iconic law enforcement figures, had just changed the rules of engagement. And as she watched the pieces moving into position on her digital chessboard, she wondered if she had made the right call, or if she had just unleashed forces that even she couldn't control. The midnight hour cast the suburban neighborhood in stillness, broken only by the occasional passing headlights of late-night commuters. On Laurel Avenue, the house with blue shutters had gone dark again, Marcus Delgado's silhouette no longer visible through thermal imaging. In the FBI surveillance van, the mood had shifted from professional determination to simmering frustration. "Systems restored," Agent Chen announced, the relief in his voice palpable after nearly 2 hours of frantic work. "But the target's signal has gone completely dark. Either the phone is powered off, or it's been placed in a Faraday container." Agent Tanner stood behind him, arms crossed tightly across his chest. "Or our suspect is gone. Wilson, Morales, prepare for entry. We've lost our window for passive surveillance." As the agents geared up for a tactical approach, Tanner's secure phone vibrated with an incoming call. The display showed a designation he hadn't expected: Director Oversight. "This is Tanner," he answered, stepping away from his team. "Agent Tanner, this is Deputy Director Lawrence." The voice carried the unmistakable gravity of upper echelon authority. "Your operation is being reassigned, effective immediately. Stand down and return to headquarters for debriefing." Tanner felt a cold sensation spreading through his chest. "Sir, with respect, we're minutes away from apprehending our suspect. The phone we've been tracking—" "Is no longer your concern, Agent Tanner," Lawrence interrupted. "This operation has been elevated beyond your clearance level. A specialized team is taking over. Your only task now is to withdraw without drawing attention." "May I ask what prompted this reassignment, sir?" Tanner pressed, professional pride warring with ingrained obedience. The pause that followed spoke volumes. "Let's just say that certain interested parties have deemed your approach insufficient for the threat level involved. Complete handover protocols and report for debriefing at 0800 tomorrow." The call ended, leaving Tanner staring at his phone in disbelief. In 15 years with the Bureau, he had never been summarily removed from an active operation without explanation. Something had changed, something significant enough to trigger intervention from the highest levels. His gaze drifted toward Elizabeth Hackman's house, barely visible in the distance. Had she done this? Had her cryptic phone conversation been more than just a civilian exercising her constitutional knowledge? "Change of plans," he announced to his team, his voice carefully neutral. "We've been ordered to stand down, pack up, and prepare for immediate withdrawal." While confusion rippled through the FBI team, Elizabeth Hackman observed their conversation through their still compromised communications. She hadn't expected such swift action from her contacts, nor such a definitive removal of the FBI team. Whatever was happening with Marcus Delgado and the data breach, it clearly warranted extraordinary measures. Her monitoring systems tracked the FBI surveillance van as it rolled away from the neighborhood, heading back toward the city center. Simultaneously, her perimeter sensors detected new vehicles approaching, unmarked SUVs with government plates, moving with the practiced precision of specialized operators. They didn't park conspicuously like the FBI team had. Instead, they dispersed to strategic positions, establishing a subtle but comprehensive containment perimeter around the Laurel Avenue address. Elizabeth's secure phone buzzed with an incoming text. Asset team deployed. Maintain information support only. Direct engagement prohibited. She acknowledged the message, then returned her attention to monitoring Marcus Delgado's residence. Through her compromised access to neighborhood security cameras and her own specialized equipment, she maintained visual awareness that the FBI team had lacked, which is why she was the first to notice when Delgado emerged from his back door, moving furtively toward a detached garage that had remained unused during previous surveillance. Elizabeth immediately relayed this information through her secure channel. Target mobile via unknown vehicle in modified garage structure, possible exit route not covered by perimeter. The response was immediate. Acknowledged, adjusting containment. On her monitors, Elizabeth watched as two of the unmarked vehicles smoothly repositioned, closing the potential escape route. The choreography of their movements suggested these weren't ordinary federal agents, but specialized operators with advanced training, possibly military or intelligence assets rather than law enforcement. A notification popped up on her screen. Someone was attempting to access her home network from an external source. The intrusion was sophisticated, probing her digital defenses with expertise that far exceeded standard FBI capabilities. Elizabeth's automated countermeasures deflected the initial attempt, but a second probe followed immediately, using a different approach. "So now I'm being targeted too," she murmured, fingers flying across her keyboard to strengthen her defenses. The timing wasn't coincidental. Whoever had taken over the operation was now investigating her as well, testing her capabilities and potentially her involvement. "Patterson," she whispered, recognizing the digital fingerprint of Adrian Patterson, a legendary figure in government cybersecurity circles. If he was involved, this situation had escalated even beyond what she had anticipated. Her father had worked with Patterson's team as research for a role once, studying their methods for a film about digital terrorism. Gene Hackman had later introduced his daughter to Patterson at an industry event, never imagining that years later they would find themselves on opposite sides of a digital battlefield. Elizabeth's phone rang, her personal line, not the secure channel. The caller ID showed unknown, but she knew immediately who it would be. "Hello, Adrian," she answered, not bothering with pretense. "Elizabeth Hackman," came the response, the voice carrying a hint of admiration despite the professional tension. "I should have recognized your handiwork with the FBI surveillance system, still signing your exploits with that distinctive packet fragmentation, I see. And you're still probing networks with unnecessary elegance when brute force would be more efficient," she countered. "Are we really playing this game, or can we acknowledge that we're both working toward the same objective?" Patterson's low chuckle carried through the connection. "That depends entirely on what you believe that objective to be, and on whose authority you've inserted yourself into a classified operation." "I inserted nothing," Elizabeth replied calmly. "Federal agents arrived at my door with an incorrectly executed warrant. Everything since has been defensive response to increasingly concerning developments, including compromising a federal surveillance operation and contacting questionable sources with intelligence implications." Elizabeth's gaze shifted to her monitors, where Marcus Delgado could be seen returning to his house, apparently abandoning his escape attempt as he noticed the repositioned vehicles. When undercover agents start dying internationally and the local FBI team demonstrates procedural incompetence, escalation becomes a civic duty. The silence that followed carried weight. When Patterson spoke again, his tone had shifted from professional confrontation to something more collaborative. "Your father played a convincing FBI agent in that film years ago. The real Bureau could use some of that fictional competence right now." "Are you offering me a consulting position, Adrian?" Elizabeth asked, the ghost of a smile touching her lips despite the tension. "I'm acknowledging that you're already involved, and suggesting we coordinate rather than compete. Delgado isn't just a hacker who got lucky with a database breach. He's connected to something much bigger, and your address confusion wasn't an accident. Elizabeth's pulse quickened. I suspected as much when I found the tampered junction box. Someone wanted to create digital overlap between our addresses. Precisely, Patterson confirmed. The question is, why your address specifically was chosen? What connection might exist that made you a valuable misdirection? Elizabeth glanced at the framed photos on her wall, her father receiving awards, her own graduation, family gatherings. One image stood out, a charity event from 2 years earlier where she had been photographed with several technology executives, including the CEO of Crestview Medical Center's parent company, Delgado's employer. I think I might know, she said slowly. But if I'm right, this goes far beyond a simple data breach. Outside, the specialized containment team tightened their perimeter around Marcus Delgado's house, unaware that the true complexity of the situation was only beginning to unfold in the digital conversation between two of the nation's most capable cyber operators, one working officially for the government and one who had been unwittingly pulled into a conspiracy that somehow, inexplicably, centered on her connection to a man who had breached national security databases and compromised agents around the world. Dawn broke over the suburban landscape, casting long shadows across the lawns of Laurel Drive and Laurel Avenue. The night's activities had given way to an uneasy stillness as specialized teams maintained their invisible perimeter around Marcus Delgado's residence. Inside her home office, Elizabeth Hackman studied the charity gala photograph with renewed intensity, searching for connections she might have missed. Her secure line buzzed with an incoming communication from Adrian Patterson. We need to meet. Sending coordinates now. Elizabeth checked the location, a coffee shop 15 minutes from her neighborhood, public enough to be safe, but quiet enough for discreet conversation. ETA 30 minutes, she replied, already gathering her equipment. Before leaving, she activated additional security protocols on her home systems and sent a brief, encrypted message to her father. Following a lead. Will contact, by secure means later. Standard precautions in effect. Gene Hackman would understand the subtext, their long-established code indicating she was pursuing something potentially dangerous but had taken appropriate measures. The coffee shop was nearly empty when Elizabeth arrived, apart from a barista arranging pastries and a solitary figure in the corner booth. Adrian Patterson, his silver-streaked hair and angular features, making him look more like an academic than one of the government's most elite cyber operators. A second cup of coffee already waited across from him. You remembered, Elizabeth noted as she slid into the seat, referring to her preference for strong black coffee. Vienna, 2022. You gave that lecture on quantum encryption vulnerabilities while drinking 3 cups of black coffee and correcting the moderator's technical terminology. Patterson's expression remained serious despite the momentary levity. We have approximately 12 minutes before this location becomes compromised. Marcus Delgado is more connected than we initially assessed. Elizabeth took a sip of coffee, her expression betraying nothing. Connected to whom, exactly? That's the multi-billion-dollar question. Patterson slid an encrypted tablet across the table. Facial recognition from international intelligence databases. Tell me who you recognize. The tablet displayed surveillance photos from various locations around the world, airport terminals, hotel lobbies, conference centers. In each image, a red box highlighted a specific individual. Elizabeth swiped through them methodically, her cybersecurity training allowing her to quickly process and catalog the information. That's Holloway, Crestview's CEO, in Zurich last month, she noted, continuing to swipe. This is Delgado in Singapore, and this... She paused, eyes narrowing at an image from a Tokyo technology conference. This is Dr. Elise Chambers, head of Crestview's AI diagnostic division. I consulted for her department 3 years ago on their neural network security protocols. Patterson nodded. Keep going. Elizabeth swiped to the next image and froze. The photograph showed a private airfield somewhere with mountainous terrain in the background. Standing near a corporate jet was a familiar figure, herself. This is from the Colorado Biotech Symposium last year. I was a keynote speaker. Look at the background near the hangar, Patterson instructed. Elizabeth zoomed in and felt her pulse quicken. Barely visible in the shadows was Marcus Delgado, watching her from a distance. Elizabeth set down the tablet, her mind racing through implications. But why? I consulted for Crestview years ago, but it was a standard security audit. Nothing classified, nothing controversial. Understanding dawned in Elizabeth's eyes. Remote biometric monitoring of undercover operatives. But they weren't secure, Elizabeth concluded, the pieces finally aligning. Someone compromised the system. Elizabeth processed this information with growing alarm. And Delgado? Where does he fit? Former security programmer for Horizon's classified projects. Officially terminated for ethical violations 6 months ago. Unofficially, he expressed concerns about system vulnerabilities that were dismissed by leadership. Patterson checked his watch. We have 4 minutes. That's our working theory, but Delgado's methods have made it impossible to distinguish him from a hostile actor. He's accessed classified information, compromised federal databases, and appears to be selling information on the dark web. Or making it look like he is, Elizabeth countered, to draw attention to the vulnerability. Patterson studied her intently. You sound sympathetic to his cause. I understand the ethical dilemma of discovering your work is endangering lives while your superiors refuse to acknowledge the problem. Elizabeth met his gaze unflinchingly. But that still doesn't explain why he would deliberately connect his activities to my address. 2 possibilities, Patterson replied. Either he believes you can help expose the truth because of your reputation in cybersecurity ethics, or he believes I'm somehow complicit, Elizabeth finished, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. My security audit 3 years ago. I could have missed something critical in their systems. Or approved protocols that were later modified for purposes beyond your knowledge, Patterson suggested. Either way, Delgado believes you're connected to this situation. And now, so do we. Elizabeth's phone vibrated with an alert from her home security system. The facial recognition had identified someone approaching her front door, Agent Tanner from the FBI team, now operating alone without his colleagues. Looks like our time is up in more ways than one, she observed, showing Patterson the alert. Your specialized team may have taken over the Delgado surveillance, but the FBI isn't completely backing down. Patterson stood, leaving cash for the coffee. Agent Tanner has been officially removed from the investigation. His current actions are unauthorized and potentially career-ending. Unless he knows something we don't, Elizabeth countered, gathering her belongings, something that would make risking his career worthwhile. As they walked toward the exit, Patterson spoke quietly. The containment team will move on Delgado within the hour. Whatever his intentions, we can't risk further compromise of intelligence assets. Elizabeth paused at the door. And if he's trying to prevent more deaths rather than cause them? That's why I brought you into the loop, Elizabeth. Patterson's expression was grave. Because sometimes it takes someone outside the system to see the truth within it. They parted ways outside the coffee shop, Patterson toward a waiting government vehicle, Elizabeth to her own car. As she drove home to confront whatever Agent Tanner wanted, her mind worked through scenarios and connections with the methodical precision that had made her one of the most respected figures in cybersecurity. The morning sun had fully risen now, illuminating a neighborhood that had become the unlikely epicenter of an international intelligence crisis. And Elizabeth Hackman, who had begun the previous day concerned only with her privacy rights, now found herself navigating a moral labyrinth where the difference between whistleblower and traitor, between hero and villain, depended entirely on whose version of the truth prevailed. Elizabeth Hackman arrived home to find Agent Tanner sitting on her front steps, his bureau-issued SUV nowhere in sight. He wore civilian clothes rather than his usual suit, and the dark circles under his eyes suggested he hadn't slept since their last encounter. His body language, shoulders hunched, hands clasped tightly together, spoke of a man under immense pressure. Agent Tanner, Elizabeth greeted him calmly as she approached. I believe you've been officially removed from this investigation. Your presence here could be considered harassment. Tanner stood slowly, his exhaustion evident in every movement. Ms. Hackman, I'm not here as an FBI agent, not officially anyway. That distinction won't matter much to your superiors, Elizabeth observed, unlocking her front door but not inviting him inside. Or to the specialized team that's taken over your operation. If Tanner was surprised by her knowledge, he didn't show it. That's exactly why I need to speak with you. Those specialized assets, they're not operating with complete information. Elizabeth studied him carefully, weighing the risks of engaging further against the potential intelligence he might provide. After a moment's consideration, she nodded toward the porch swing rather than the door. 5 minutes, Agent, in plain view of my security cameras in the neighborhood. They sat side by side, an arm's length apart, like casual acquaintances rather than adversaries in an escalating national security situation. 3 years ago, Tanner began without preamble, I was assigned to counterintelligence work focusing on corporate espionage in the healthcare sector. One of my cases involved Horizon Health Systems, Crestview's parent company. Elizabeth maintained her neutral expression despite her internal alarm bells. Go on. A whistleblower inside their R&D division claimed they were developing technology that violated medical ethics guidelines, specifically implantable monitoring systems with capabilities beyond what was disclosed to patients or regulatory agencies. Tanner spoke in a low, measured tone, his gaze fixed on the suburban street ahead. The investigation was shut down by order of the assistant director. The whistleblower disappeared from the company records. The case was sealed. And you believe this connects to Marcus Delgado and the current situation, Elizabeth prompted when he paused. Tanner turned to face her directly. I know it does, because the whistleblower was Marcus Delgado's wife, Sophia. She died in what was ruled a car accident 6 months ago, the same week Delgado was terminated from Horizon. The piece clicked into place with chilling clarity. Delgado hadn't just discovered a security vulnerability, he was seeking justice for his wife, a wife who had tried to expose the same ethical violations through proper channels and potentially paid with her life. Why are you telling me this? Elizabeth asked, though she already suspected the answer. Because your security audit from 3 years ago is cited repeatedly in the classified reports as verification that the systems were ethically implemented. Tanner's expression was grim. Your reputation was used to quash internal concerns and regulatory inquiries. Elizabeth felt a cold weight settling in her stomach. Her work, her professional assessment, had been weaponized to silence legitimate ethical concerns, concerns that had later proven tragically valid as agents died in the field. I need to see those reports, she said quietly. My audit had specific limitations and conditions. If they've misrepresented my findings, they did. Tanner withdrew a small encrypted flash drive from his pocket. Everything I could download before they locked me out of the system is here, including the full unredacted version of your security assessment, not the selectively quoted version they've been circulating internally. Elizabeth stared at the drive, understanding the magnitude of what Tanner was risking. You realize this is the end of your career. My career ended the moment I questioned why we were targeting Delgado with such urgency while ignoring the executives who buried his wife's warnings. Tanner placed the drive on the swing between them. I'm not asking you to trust me, Ms. Hackman. I'm asking you to verify the truth yourself. A notification on Elizabeth's phone interrupted the moment, an alert from her security system monitoring Delgado's residence. The specialized containment team was moving in, their tactical formation suggesting they intended to breach the house within minutes. They're going in, she said, showing Tanner the feed. Whatever Delgado knows, whatever evidence he has, they'll seize it all and bury it under national security classifications. Tanner stood abruptly. Then we're out of time. Delgado contacted me last night. That's why I went off-grid. He claims to have compiled evidence that Horizon executives knew their technology was compromised months before the first agent was identified, but they concealed the vulnerability to protect their government contracts. Where is this evidence? Elizabeth asked, also rising to her feet. That's why I came to you. Tanner's expression was deadly serious. He says it's in your house, hidden in your network during the junction box tampering 3 months ago. He created a digital dead drop that would only activate if both your addresses were investigated simultaneously. Elizabeth's mind raced through the implications. The warrant confusion wasn't just to draw me in. It was a triggering mechanism. He needed federal agents to hit both addresses to activate whatever he's hidden. Exactly, and with the specialized team taking over, that mechanism failed. Tanner checked his watch anxiously. Unless you can find it and access it before they take him into custody. Elizabeth made her decision, pocketing the flash drive and gesturing for Tanner to follow her. My home office, now. As they hurried inside, Elizabeth's secure phone buzzed with a message from Patterson. Breach in progress. Target resistance encountered. Situation escalating. In her office, Elizabeth immediately began running specialized search algorithms across her network, looking for hidden partitions, encrypted packets, or dormant code that might constitute Delgado's dead drop. Tanner stood back, watching her work with the focused intensity of someone whose entire professional training had centered on digital investigation. There, she said after several tense minutes, isolating an encrypted data package buried within her network's backup protocols. It's genius, actually. He hid it in the automatic system recovery files, a location so fundamental that even a complete system reset wouldn't purge it. Can you access it? Tanner asked, leaning closer to see the screen. It's encrypted with a key I don't have, Elizabeth replied, studying the code structure. But there's something familiar about the encryption pattern. It's custom, but it's based on the same security protocols I developed for Crestview's patient data systems. Tanner's expression tightened. He's used your own encryption method, knowing you'd recognize it. Not just recognize it, Elizabeth corrected, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Decrypt it. He's used my encryption but modified it with a personal key, something specific to me that he believed I would understand. Her phone buzzed again with another update from Patterson. Suspect wounded. Scene being secured. Evidence collection in progress. Time was running out. Elizabeth stared at the encryption key requirement, trying to think like Delgado. What connection would he believe existed between them? What shared knowledge could serve as a key? Then it hit her. The charity gala photo. She quickly pulled up the image and examined the metadata, looking for anything distinctive. The file had been accessed multiple times in recent months, though she hadn't opened it herself. The timestamp, she murmured, noticing an anomaly in the photo's digital signature. It's been altered. When she entered the modified timestamp as an encryption key, the system immediately began decrypting the hidden data package. Tanner watched in tense silence as documents, video files, and database entries materialized on Elizabeth's screen, the evidence cache that Marcus Delgado had risked everything to preserve. The first video file showed a Horizon executive meeting from 8 months earlier. On screen, Richard Holloway, CEO of Crestview, addressed a room of concerned-looking officials. The vulnerability has been contained. There's no need to recall the implanted units or notify field operators. Our assessment, backed by Ms. Hackman's original security audit, confirms that the potential risk is theoretical rather than actual. Elizabeth felt physically ill as she watched her professional reputation being used to justify decisions that had already led to agents' deaths. Beside her, Tanner's expression hardened into cold fury. He knew, Tanner said quietly. They all knew, and they let those agents die rather than admit their technology was flawed. As the video continued playing, Elizabeth's secure phone lit up with an incoming call from Adrian Patterson. She answered, putting it on speaker. Elizabeth, we have Delgado in custody, Patterson reported, his voice tight. He's been shot. Before losing consciousness, he said only one thing. Ask Elizabeth about the ghost in her machine. Does that mean anything to you? Elizabeth looked at her screen, where Delgado's evidence was continuing to decrypt. The ghost he had hidden in her system, now revealing itself, and the deadly corporate conspiracy it documented. Yes, she replied, meeting Tanner's gaze. It means everything. The sterile hallways of Metro General Hospital hummed with the quiet efficiency of a facility accustomed to crisis. In a secured wing, behind doors guarded by stone-faced operatives who identified with no particular agency, Marcus Delgado fought for his life. The gunshot wound he had sustained during the raid was severe, but not immediately fatal. A small mercy in an otherwise merciless operation. Elizabeth Hackman stood at the observation window, watching medical personnel work on the unconscious man who had gone to extraordinary lengths to involve her in his crusade. Beside her, Adrian Patterson maintained a professional distance, both physically and emotionally, from the unfolding drama. How convenient that he can't be questioned, Elizabeth remarked, her voice carrying an edge that hadn't been present in their earlier interactions. A wounded suspect can't contradict the official narrative. Patterson's expression remained carefully neutral. The shot was fired when he reached for what appeared to be a weapon. Standard protocol was followed. And was it standard protocol to use deadly force against a potential whistleblower rather than a hostile foreign agent? Elizabeth challenged, turning to face him directly. Or is that distinction irrelevant when the objective is containment rather than truth? Before Patterson could respond, the door at the end of the hallway opened to admit Agent Tanner, now accompanied by two senior-looking officials in conservative suits, the unmistakable uniform of high-level government bureaucracy. Tanner's expression warned Elizabeth to proceed with caution. Ms. Hackman, the older of the two men, greeted her, extending his hand. Assistant Director Calloway, FBI, Counterintelligence Division. This is Deputy Director Harmond from National Intelligence. We understand you've come into possession of sensitive information related to our ongoing investigation. Elizabeth shook their hands briefly, but didn't offer the deference they clearly expected. I've come into possession of evidence documenting corporate negligence that resulted in the deaths of federal agents, if that's what you mean. The subtle tightening around Calloway's eyes suggested her directness was unwelcome. That characterization is premature and potentially inaccurate. The materials you accessed through Mr. Delgado's unauthorized intrusion into your systems contain classified information that requires proper contextual analysis by authorized personnel. I've reviewed enough to understand the context, Elizabeth countered. Horizon Health Systems knew their implantable monitoring technology was compromised months before agents began dying in the field. They concealed this knowledge to protect their government contracts, using my security audit as cover for their deception. Deputy Director Harmon stepped forward, his demeanor more conciliatory than his colleagues. Ms. Hackman, your reputation in the cybersecurity community is well established. That's precisely why we need your cooperation in handling this matter appropriately. National security concerns must be balanced with accountability. Elizabeth recognized the technique. Good cop, bad cop, a routine her father had performed in countless films, and that these men now employed in real life with practiced ease. Let's be clear, gentlemen. My cooperation isn't being requested, it's being assumed. And handling this matter appropriately appears to be code for burying evidence of corporate malfeasance behind national security classifications. Patterson, who had remained silent during this exchange, finally spoke. Elizabeth, perhaps we should continue this discussion in a more private setting. The materials you've accessed represent only part of a much larger intelligence picture. A picture that includes Richard Holloway and Crestview executives deliberately concealing system vulnerabilities that got people killed, Elizabeth asserted, loud enough that her voice carried down the hallway. That's not classified intelligence. That's criminal negligence. Assistant Director Calloway stepped closer, lowering his voice to a near whisper. Ms. Hackman, your father's reputation and legacy afford you certain considerations that might not otherwise be extended. Don't mistake that professional courtesy for weakness or indecision on our part. The mention of her father, the implied threat to Gene Hackman's reputation, caused something to shift in Elizabeth's demeanor. The controlled professional was replaced by a daughter protecting her family legacy with the same intensity that had made her father's on-screen law enforcement characters so compelling. Let me be equally clear, Assistant Director, she replied, her voice steady and determined. My father portrayed men of principle who upheld justice regardless of political consequence. I've inherited that commitment to truth, not just his name. If you're suggesting that my family connections will influence my decisions in this matter, you've fundamentally misunderstood both Gene Hackman and his daughter. The tense standoff was interrupted by Agent Tanner clearing his throat. Sir, the evidence cache includes direct testimony from Sofia Delgado before her death, documenting repeated attempts to report the security vulnerabilities through appropriate channels. Her supervisor at Horizon authorized code changes that deliberately masked the system's compromised status in audit reports. Calloway shot Tanner a look that could have frozen fire. Agent Tanner, you were removed from this investigation. Your continued involvement borders on insubordination. With respect, sir, Tanner replied, standing his ground. When federal agents die because corporate contractors concealed known vulnerabilities, insubordination becomes a matter of conscience. Deputy Director Harmond, apparently recognizing that strong-arm tactics were proving counterproductive, changed approaches. Ms. Hackman, no one is suggesting that accountability isn't important, but the methods matter as much as the outcome. Delgado violated numerous federal laws obtaining and distributing this information, potentially compromising ongoing intelligence operations in the process. The operations were already compromised, Elizabeth pointed out. That's the entire point. Agents were being identified and killed because their biometric signatures were compromised. Delgado wasn't causing the problem. He was exposing it after proper channels failed his wife and cost her life. Through the observation window, medical personnel continued working on Delgado, their urgent movements suggesting his condition remained critical. Elizabeth found herself wondering if he would survive to tell his own story, or if that would even matter in a system seemingly designed to protect institutional interests over individual lives. Patterson checked his secure phone as it vibrated with an incoming message. Whatever he read caused a subtle change in his expression, not quite alarm, but a new urgency that hadn't been present before. "We have a situation," he announced to the group. "Richard Holloway has called an emergency board meeting at Horizon's headquarters. Security protocols suggest they're preparing for system-wide data, purging under the guise of emergency security upgrades." Elizabeth immediately understood the implications. They're destroying evidence. Once they learn Delgado survived and that his evidence cache has been accessed, they'll eliminate anything that could corroborate his claims. For the first time, Assistant Director Calloway appeared genuinely concerned rather than merely authoritative. Corporate executives destroying evidence that might implicate them in the deaths of federal agents created a clear jurisdictional mandate that even he couldn't ignore. "How long do we have?" he asked Patterson. "The purge is scheduled to begin in 90 minutes. Given their distributed server architecture and backup protocols, they'll need at least that much time to ensure complete data sanitization." Elizabeth turned to face the assembled officials, her expression resolute. "Gentlemen, I believe your jurisdictional disputes and concerns about proper channels have just become irrelevant. If you want to preserve evidence of criminal negligence that cost American agents their lives, we need to move now, and you need my help." The men exchanged glances, years of institutional caution, warring with the immediate tactical necessity. Finally, Deputy Director Harmon nodded. "What exactly are you proposing, Ms. Hackman?" Elizabeth's response was immediate and definitive. "I helped design their security systems. I know their architecture, their protocols, and most importantly, their vulnerabilities. With Agent Tanner's assistance and Mr. Patterson's operational authority, I can bypass their purge protocols and secure the evidence before it's destroyed." "And your conditions?" Calloway asked, recognizing negotiation when he saw it. "Full immunity for Marcus Delgado, protection for his family, and a public acknowledgement of corporate responsibility when this is over." Elizabeth's tone made it clear these points weren't negotiable. No burying the truth behind national security classifications. The agents who died and their families deserve better. As the officials considered her terms, Elizabeth's phone vibrated with an incoming call from her father. Gene Hackman's timing had always been impeccable, whether on screen or in life. She let it go to voicemail, knowing that whatever happened next would make for a story even her father's legendary career couldn't have scripted. Outside the hospital window, the midday sun illuminated a world unaware that the daughter of Hollywood's most iconic law enforcement actor was now engaged in a real-life drama where justice, accountability, and lives hung in the balance. And like her father's most memorable characters, Elizabeth Hackman had drawn her line in the sand. Principle over expediency, truth over convenience, justice over institutional comfort. The clock was ticking. Holloway and his executives were preparing to erase their culpability. And Elizabeth, who had begun this saga by simply asserting her Fourth Amendment rights against an improperly executed warrant, now stood at the center of a conspiracy that reached from suburban California to intelligence operations around the globe. The gleaming glass and steel headquarters of Horizon Health Systems towered over the San Francisco financial district, a monument to corporate success and technological innovation. In the underground parking garage beneath this architectural marvel, a nondescript van served as a mobile command center where Elizabeth Hackman sat surrounded by specialized equipment and tense federal agents. The hastily assembled operation had moved with remarkable efficiency once the bureaucratic resistance gave way to tactical necessity. Horizon's network security consists of 3 distinct layers, Elizabeth explained, fingers flying across her keyboard as she briefed the team. external firewall protection, internal segmentation barriers, and core data vault encryption. Their emergency purge protocol will systematically overwrite data across all three layers, beginning with peripheral systems and moving inward. On the main display, a schematic of Horizon's digital architecture glowed in blue and white, key nodes highlighted in red to indicate vulnerability points. Agent Tanner studied the display intently, while Adrian Patterson coordinated with a tactical team preparing to enter the building under the guise of a routine security inspection. Their system was designed to prevent external intrusion, Elizabeth continued, but they never anticipated that someone who helped design their security would be actively working to preserve data they want destroyed. Assistant Director Calloway, who had insisted on overseeing the operation personally, leaned forward. "You're certain you can bypass their security without triggering alerts?" "Not entirely," Elizabeth admitted. "What I can do is create a digital diversion, a ghost intrusion, that will draw their security team's attention while we establish a secondary access point through their emergency backup systems." Deputy Director Harmond, monitoring the situation from Washington via secure video link, appeared skeptical. "Ms. Hackman, if this fails and they realize we're attempting to access their systems without a warrant—" "We have exigent circumstances," Tanner interjected. "Imminent destruction of evidence relevant to an ongoing federal investigation. The legal precedent is clear." Elizabeth ignored the jurisdictional debate, focusing instead on the task at hand. "Patterson, your team needs to access the network maintenance room on the 6th floor. That's where the physical backup drives are located for their executive communication systems." Patterson nodded, relaying instructions to his tactical team through a secure earpiece. "We'll move on your signal." The atmosphere in the mobile command center crackled with tension as final preparations were made. Elizabeth had transformed from civilian consultant to operation leader in less than an hour, a role she had never anticipated, but now embraced with the same determination that characterized her approach to cybersecurity challenges. "I want to be clear about something," she said, pausing her technical work to address the officials directly. "What we find here doesn't get buried. The families of those agents deserve to know why they died. The public deserves to know when profit is prioritized over lives." Calloway's expression remained non-committal. "Let's secure the evidence first. Policy discussions can follow." Elizabeth held his gaze. "That wasn't a policy suggestion, Assistant Director. It was a condition of my participation. Either we agree now that the truth goes public, or I walk away and you can try to breach their systems without me." The silence that followed was broken by Deputy Director Harmon's voice from the video feed. "The Director has authorized full disclosure to the families of affected agents and appropriate congressional oversight committees. Public disclosure will be determined based on national security implications of the specific evidence recovered." It wasn't everything Elizabeth wanted, but it was enough to proceed. She returned to her keyboard, initiating the complex sequence that would create their digital diversion. On her screen, lines of code cascaded as her program deployed, probing Horizon's external security systems with enough persistence to trigger alerts, but not enough aggression to suggest a sophisticated attack. "Diversion deployed," she announced. "Their security team should be responding to what appears to be a moderately skilled intrusion attempt from an Eastern European IP range." Patterson confirmed through his tactical team that security personnel inside the building were indeed reacting, their attention focused on the apparent external threat. "We have movement. IT security staff converging on their network operations center." "Perfect," Elizabeth replied, switching to a secondary system. "Now for the real breach." Her fingers moved with practiced precision, navigating digital pathways she had helped design years earlier. Despite the system updates and security enhancements implemented since her audit, the fundamental architecture remained unchanged, a testament to corporate complacency and the assumption that their secrets were safely contained. "I'm in," she announced after several tense minutes, accessing their executive communication servers now. On the main display, directories of internal documents began to appear, thousands of files containing emails, meeting minutes, system reports, and technical specifications. Elizabeth quickly deployed a specialized search algorithm designed to identify files related to the implantable monitoring technology and security vulnerability reports. "There," she said, highlighting a secured folder labeled Project Sentinel, classification level Alpha. That's their code name for the implantable monitoring program. It's under their highest internal security classification. As she worked to bypass the additional encryption on these files, a notification appeared on her screen, a security alert indicating that their secondary intrusion had been detected. "They know we're in," she announced calmly. "The purge protocol has been accelerated. We have less than 5 minutes before these files are overwritten." Patterson immediately contacted his tactical team. "Move in now. Secure the physical backup drives." Calloway was already on his secure phone, coordinating with federal agents positioned outside the building. "All exits secured. No one leaves until we complete data acquisition." Elizabeth's focus remained absolute, her attention fixed on breaking through the final security layer protecting the Project Sentinel files. "Almost there," she murmured, implementing a decryption technique that exploited a vulnerability she had identified during her original audit, a vulnerability that Horizon had apparently never addressed. The encryption gave way, revealing the complete Project Sentinel archive, including video recordings of executive meetings discussing the security breach, technical reports detailing the vulnerability, and most damning of all, internal risk assessments calculating the financial impact of recalling compromised implants versus the potential costs of litigation if agents were harmed. "They did a cost-benefit analysis," Elizabeth said, her voice tight with controlled fury as she scanned the documents. "They literally calculated how many agents could die before the financial liability outweighed the cost of fixing the vulnerability." Even Calloway, hardened by years in counterintelligence, appeared visibly disturbed by this revelation. "Download everything, every file, every communication, every calculation." As Elizabeth worked to secure the evidence, another alert flashed on her screen, this one accompanied by a message that sent a chill through the command center. "Unauthorized access detected. Emergency Protocol Omega initiated." "What is Protocol Omega?" Tanner demanded, leaning forward to see the alert. Elizabeth's expression darkened. "It's not in any of the documentation I reviewed during my audit. It must be a new addition to their security protocols." On the display, files began disappearing at an alarming rate, not just being overwritten, but seemingly vanishing from the system entirely. Elizabeth's fingers flew across the keyboard as she attempted to counter whatever destructive algorithm had been deployed. "It's not just erasing data," she realized with growing alarm. "It's physically disconnecting storage arrays and initiating hardware-level formatting. This goes beyond standard data sanitization. It's scorched earth." From Patterson's tactical team came urgent reports. The physical backup drives on the 6th floor were automatically ejecting from their bays and locking down in secured containment units. Whatever Protocol Omega entailed, it had been designed specifically to thwart exactly the kind of operation they were conducting. Elizabeth made a split-second decision, implementing a radical approach that violated standard cybersecurity practices. "I'm going to crash their entire network," she announced. "A complete system failure will freeze the current state of all connected drives before Protocol Omega can complete its deletion sequence." "Do it," Calloway authorized without hesitation. With methodical precision that belied the urgency of the moment, Elizabeth initiated a cascading system failure across Horizon's network infrastructure. One by one, servers began dropping offline, security protocols failed, and automated systems reverted to emergency preservation states. The digital equivalent of a controlled demolition unfolded on their monitors as one of the world's most sophisticated corporate networks collapsed into safe mode. "Got it," Elizabeth announced as the last server went offline. "Whatever files survived Protocol Omega are now frozen in place. Their system will automatically create crash recovery images that will preserve evidence of both the documents and the attempt to destroy them." Outside the van, federal agents were already entering the Horizon headquarters, armed with emergency warrants to seize servers and backup drives. Inside the command center, the atmosphere had shifted from desperate urgency to cautious optimism. Elizabeth leaned back in her chair, the adrenaline of the operation giving way to the sobering reality of what they had uncovered. Corporate executives had deliberately risked and ultimately sacrificed the lives of undercover agents for financial gain, using her work to provide cover for their deception. "When this goes public," she said quietly to Tanner, "it will change how government contractors handle security vulnerabilities forever." Tanner nodded solemnly. "If it goes public?" Elizabeth's expression hardened with resolve. "It will. I'm going to make sure of it." 3 months later, Elizabeth Hackman sat in the waiting area outside a Senate Intelligence Committee hearing room, her composed exterior masking the nervous energy that had been her constant companion since the Horizon investigation began. The corridors of power in Washington, D.C. were a far cry from her quiet suburban home on Laurel Drive, yet she had navigated them with the same principled determination that had carried her through that fateful confrontation with FBI agents on her doorstep. The mahogany doors opened, and a congressional aide gestured for her to enter. Inside the wood-paneled room, senators from both parties sat in a semicircle, facing a single witness table equipped with microphones and water glasses. The gallery behind them was filled with journalists, family members of affected agents, and various government officials, including Agent Tanner and Adrian Patterson, seated side by side, despite their different agencies and initial adversarial relationship. Ms. Hackman, the committee chairwoman, began once Elizabeth was seated. "Thank you for appearing today. Your written testimony has been entered into the record, but we'd like to hear in your own words how you uncovered what is now being called one of the most significant corporate national security breaches in American history." Elizabeth leaned toward the microphone, her voice steady and clear. "Chairwoman, distinguished committee members, I didn't set out to uncover a conspiracy. I simply stood on my constitutional rights when federal agents appeared at my door with an improperly executed warrant. What followed was the unraveling of a corporate decision-making process that deliberately placed profit above the lives of American intelligence operatives." For the next hour, Elizabeth methodically walked the committee through the events that had begun that morning on her porch: the address confusion, the discovery of the tampered internet junction box, the digital evidence Delgado had hidden in her system, and ultimately the damning files recovered from Horizon's servers before Protocol Omega could destroy them. "The most disturbing discovery," she continued, "was the documented evidence that Horizon executives knew their implantable monitoring technology had been compromised for 7 months before the first agent was identified and eliminated in Bangkok. Their own internal assessment calculated that recalling and replacing the compromised implants would cost approximately $240 million, while the potential liability for agent deaths was estimated at only $2 to $4 million per casualty." A murmur of disgust rippled through the gallery, particularly from the section where family members of fallen agents were seated. Elizabeth had insisted they be present for this testimony, despite agency reluctance to acknowledge the classified nature of their loved one's work. "Ms. Hackman," a senior senator interjected, "some have suggested that your involvement in this matter was not entirely coincidental. Can you address the speculation that Marcus Delgado specifically targeted your address because of your prior security audit work with Horizon?" Elizabeth nodded, having anticipated this line of questioning. "Senator, that speculation is correct. Mr. Delgado deliberately created digital connections between our addresses to ensure that his evidence would be discovered by someone with both the technical expertise to understand it and the ethical commitment to act on it. He had attempted to use proper whistleblower channels through his wife, Sophia, whose concerns were dismissed shortly before her suspicious death in what was ruled a car accident." "And Mr. Delgado's current status?" another committee member asked. After recovering from his gunshot wound, Marcus Delgado was granted conditional immunity in exchange for his cooperation with multiple federal investigations, Elizabeth replied. "I understand he is now working with a specialized cybersecurity task force to identify other potential vulnerabilities in government contractor systems." The chairwoman consulted her notes before continuing. "Ms. Hackman, your professional reputation was used without your knowledge or consent to provide cover for Horizon's deception. How do you respond to critics who suggest you should have been more diligent in monitoring how your security audit was being implemented?" It was a question Elizabeth had asked herself countless times over the past months. "Chairwoman, my audit specifically recommended quarterly independent security reviews and emphasized the vulnerabilities in their remote monitoring protocols. Horizon executives selectively quoted my report while ignoring its key recommendations. That said, this experience has fundamentally changed how I approach security consulting. Trust but verify is no longer sufficient when lives are at stake." As the hearing continued, Elizabeth's testimony shifted from the specific details of the Horizon case to broader implications for national security, corporate accountability, and ethical responsibility in technology development. Her measured, authoritative responses revealed not just technical expertise, but a deep understanding of the human cost when systems failed. When the formal questioning concluded, the chairwoman made a rare departure from protocol. Before we adjourn, I'd like to acknowledge the presence of someone in our gallery today, Gene Hackman, whose portrayals of principled law enforcement figures have inspired generations of Americans, is here to support his daughter. Mr. Hackman, on behalf of this committee and a grateful nation, we thank you for raising a daughter who embodies the values your characters so often fought to uphold. The gallery turned to see the legendary actor, now in his 90s, but still commanding presence, acknowledging the recognition with a dignified nod. His eyes, however, remained fixed on his daughter, pride evident in his expression as he witnessed her fighting for truth with the same unwavering determination he had brought to his most memorable roles. Outside the hearing room, after the formal proceedings had concluded, Elizabeth found herself surrounded by families of the agents who had died due to Horizon's negligence. Their gratitude was humbling, their grief a painful reminder of the human cost behind the technical details and corporate malfeasance. "My husband never told me exactly what he did," one woman said quietly, clasping Elizabeth's hand. "But he believed in protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. You did that for him when he couldn't do it anymore." As the crowd dispersed, Elizabeth found herself standing with Tanner and Patterson near a window overlooking the National Mall. The journey that had begun with adversarial tension on her front porch had transformed into an unlikely alliance that had exposed corporate corruption and potentially saved countless lives. "The director has authorized a complete review of all implantable technology currently deployed in the field," Patterson informed her. "Your security protocols are being implemented as the new standard for all contractor systems." "And Richard Holloway?" Elizabeth asked, referring to Horizon's CEO. "Federal indictment was announced this morning," Tanner replied with quiet satisfaction. "Corporate manslaughter, obstruction of justice, conspiracy, 17 counts in total. The prosecutors are confident none of it gets pleaded down." Elizabeth nodded, gazing out at the Washington Monument in the distance. "So it was worth it, all of it." "Worth it doesn't begin to cover it," Patterson said. "You changed the game, Elizabeth. Corporation or government agency, no one gets to hide deadly negligence behind national security classifications anymore." As they parted ways, Elizabeth found her father waiting for her in the corridor, his weathered face bearing the same expression he had worn when she graduated from MIT, quiet pride tinged with wonder at the remarkable woman his daughter had become. "You did good, Lizzie," Gene Hackman said simply, embracing her. "You faced down the system and made it better." Elizabeth smiled, remembering the lessons he had taught her through both his roles and his life, that principles matter, that systems must serve people rather than the reverse, and that sometimes one person standing firm can change everything. "I had a good teacher," she replied. Together, father and daughter walked out of the Senate building into the bright Washington afternoon. Two generations of Hackmans who, in their own distinct ways, had shown America what justice looked like when pursued without compromise, without fear, and without surrender. The FBI agents who had appeared at her door that fateful morning had sought to invade her privacy with an improperly executed warrant. Instead, they had unwittingly set in motion a chain of events that exposed corruption, saved lives, and reminded the powerful that in America, even one citizen who knows their rights and stands firm on principle can bring truth to light, no matter how deep the darkness that seeks to conceal it.